Today's episode of Keeping the Nostalgia Alive is brought to you by Arbia Shades. Go to RBIASHADES.com and check out their full collection of glasses today. Tired of paying $300 to $700 for designer sunglasses and prescription glasses? I know I was. So the solution is Arbia Shades. Check them out today. Welcome to the Keeping the Nostalgia Alive show. I am your host, Billy Powell. You're watching this on YouTube. For those of you listening, you're probably listening to this on anchor.fm/KTNA, which stands for Keeping the Nostalgia Alive. And if you are watching this on YouTube, which is the Keeping the Nostalgia Alive show, please subscribe so you know about our upcoming programs. We've got over 200 shows, from Rick Mount to Gene Katie to our guest today, which is a 40-year broadcasting veteran. And I mean, if I go through the list of what he's done, what he does, and all of that, the show would be over. So we're going to hop right to it. It is Scott Hoke. Scott, thank you so much for spending some time with us to help keep the nostalgia alive and talk about basketball to cars to golf to the Indianapolis 500 to Ben Davis Giants and Butler Bulldogs. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's my pleasure, Billy. Thanks for having me on the show.
So where did you grow up at? What part of Indianapolis?
I grew up on the west side of Indy, and in the Ben Davis area. You used to be able to see my house from the interstate on 465, right around 10th Street, but they built up some of those sound retention or sound walls along the interstate there, so you can't see it anymore. But I was a west sider all my life, Ben Davis kid, and actually went to 12 years of school, I guess 13, K through 12, on the same block at basically the corner of 10th Street and Girls School Road out west.
That's awesome. What was your first love? Or did you love listening to stuff on the radio, watching events on TV? Did you enjoy sports first? What was your kind of first love as a youngster?
Well, that's a good question. And actually, it was, I was fascinated with radio back when I was a little kid. And in fact, I remember on more than one occasion, we would be coming home from church on a, Wednesday night or a Sunday afternoon or whatever. And I'd want my mom and dad to turn the radio up in the car, and I'd stick my head back on the package tray, and they wouldn't want to turn it up too loud because, of course, they were my parents. But I just had them turn it up a little bit, and I would stick my head back on the package tray and listen to what those guys were doing and what they were talking about. And I remember the old days of WIRE and WIFE and, of course, WIBC back in the day. And this was when I was probably 6 or 7 years old, and I thought, wow, that would be so cool someday to do something like that. But I never thought that I would actually do something like that. So it was kind of a thing that was out there, and I didn't, I loved listening to music. In those days, I thought I would love to be a professional baseball player. Played Little League, played football, basketball, all kinds of stuff when I was a kid, but never thought that, one day I would end up in that field. So it's kind of cool all these years later to remember listening to the radio and begging my parents to turn it up just a little bit more.
It's interesting that you say that, because I had a transistor radio, and I would turn it up very low, and I would put it underneath my pillow to get, to hide it from my parents. And I would listen to Bob Lamey call the Indiana Pacer games.
Dude, I'm telling you what, we could have been twins, because I remember listening to Jerry Baker during the ABA championship series, one of them that the Pacers, well, I don't know that they lost the deciding game, but it was one of the games back in 72 or 73 during the playoffs, and I snuck my radio under my pillow, and I had it so low, and they lost, and I started crying, and my mom came in, and she said, "What's wrong?" And I said, I'm sorry, Mom, the Pacers just lost. This is a phone, obviously, but I held up my radio and I said, the Pacers lost tonight. I'm just crushed. And she just shook her head and turned around and walked out. So,
See, from what I understand, too, your first Indianapolis 500 was 1973. And what a 500 to start out with.
Well, it's interesting. I was 10, and I don't remember all the circumstances that led us to go there. It was, of course, one of the worst 500s ever. And so my dad and my grandfather went. That day we sat in turn 3, and this was, I think, the third time they tried to run the race, and my dad may have gotten free tickets. I don't know. But we sat in turn 3, and I thought it was the coolest thing ever, but I didn't really have any knowledge. I wasn't paying attention to what had happened previous to that day. And so I think it would have been was that run on a Tuesday? I should remember that. It was a Tuesday, and that may be why we ended up getting free tickets somehow. But yeah, now that I look back on it, I mean, as you said, what a memorable, for all the wrong reasons, first race to attend as a youngster.
And I'm assuming that did you just fall in love with auto racing at that point in time?
Yeah, I did. And I remember taking a field trip a couple years after that. We went to the old museum, which is where the administration building is now. And I remember taking a bunch of snapshots of these trophies and these cars that were there in the building, and loved every minute of that. And, from where I grew up, my house was close enough that I could hear practice at the Speedway and the race at the Speedway. And also I could hear what was going on at Raceway Park with the U.S. Nationals when they would fire up for practice or over Labor Day weekend, their event. So, and I would, the same thing with my radio. I had my radio out in the yard, and I was listening to, the voice of the 500 back then, which I believe would still have been Sid Collins before Paul Page took over in 78, I want to say. Don't quote me on that. But yeah, many a 500 listening to it on the radio in my backyard.
Yeah, did you get to, at that young age, get to meet Tom Carnegie, or at what point in time did you get to meet Tom Carnegie?
I met Tom Carnegie for the first time, actually, when I was an intern at Channel 6, and he was just kind of getting ready to wrap up his career at Channel 6. So I met him briefly as an intern, and then a number of years later as a member of the public address team there, got to know him quite a bit better and worked with him on many occasions. So yeah, definitely a legend, and everybody still talks of TC there at the Speedway.
I grew up a little bit before moving to Broderpool off of 1210 Winfield, which is maybe a mile from the track. Mm-hmm. So, we would get up early, and they close 16th Street all the way off. And as a kid, you got you were actually you got better education walking up 16th Street before the Indianapolis 500 than you probably did from the birds and the bees from your parents, or an education from schooling.
Yes, you did. And we'll just leave it at that, right?
Yes, we will. So what was your favorite sport growing up, or what sport did you get into, or were you a multi-sport child? And did your parents back you with that? Did you have any brothers and sisters? I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I have one sister who's a year and a half younger than me, and basically I played everything. I played football as a kid, basketball. I loved baseball probably more than anything else. My dad coached my baseball team for a number of years. He actually threw me out of a game once because I got really angry. I was so competitive. I got really angry when I struck out. I was not a good hitter. I was a good pitcher and a good catcher, but not a very good hitter. But he threw me out of the game for a temper tantrum, and he should have. I mean, good for him. But and then I played basketball just 1 year as a freshman, as a sophomore at Ben Davis. And our team at that point, and this is what kind of transitioned me into broadcasting, our team was so good. We had 3 sophomores starting on the starting 5 my sophomore year. Mike Massing, who went on to play at University of Evansville, Tom Downard, who played at Indy, and then Cale Funkhauser as well. 3 sophomores starting on that team, and by the time we were seniors, we were one of the top teams in the state. So I kind of knew as a sophomore that this whole basketball thing wasn't going to work out, and I was probably going to be better off doing the games on the radio, which is what I ended up doing.
Ben Davis was one of the, Ben Davis, would you put Ben Davis and North Central kind of in the same, really, of course, North Central being a county school, but pretty good sized schools. Yes.
Ben Davis, North Central, Carmel, Tech, back in those days were, I think, the big 4 here in the Indianapolis area. I know we always had big rivalry with Pike across the township line. So yeah, those were, and Warren Central, of course, on the other side of town. JV team played Warren on a number of occasions, and they were kind of a crosstown rival for us as well.
So when did the light bulb in your head go off that you wanted to do broadcasting?
That's really easy. I could probably look the date up and find it specifically, but it was the end of my first semester as a sophomore at Ben Davis. And, like I said, I was on the basketball team, and I walked into my guidance counselor's office, Rosie Leedy, and she said, "Hey, you need to be thinking about next semester's schedule, and you need an elective." I said, "Okay, what you got?" And she said, "Well," because I had no idea. I had no clue. Remember I told you, I wasn't thinking broadcasting at that point. But she said, "You know what? You've got a really nice speaking voice, I think, and you ought to try this radio class that we have here at Ben Davis." And I thought, okay, that's cool. So I signed up for it, didn't think about it. And so the first day of the spring semester, January of 1980 sometime, I walked into my Radio 1 class at Ben Davis, and I opened the door and walked in, and I look over here. There's a couple of turntables and a mic and a couple of loudspeakers and a little audio board, and over here there's the same thing, basically practice stations to learn how to be a DJ. And I felt like Andy Dufresne in Shawshank. I just, I thought, man, this is so cool. This is what I really dig. This is awesome. This is what I want to do. And it was like that day. And so I've told that story from the stage. I've told that story on other interviews. And that I'm really, really thankful to God for his guidance there, and for me paying attention to what Rosie Leedy was telling me, because that was a real huge turning point for me and my career. And so that was it.
Now I may not be talking intelligently, but they still have that program, and I think does John Easter do a lot of stuff with that at Ben Davis?
Yes, he does. I haven't been over there in a while, but he does. And as the last I knew, and I believe this is still correct, Dennis Goins, my good friend who used to work at Wish TV 8 as a photographer, heads up part of their television side too, their visual, audio visual side. So yeah, and John's been there quite a while, for quite a number of years now.
Awesome. So going through Ben Davis, going through the radio program, where did you want to go to college? What did you was Butler your first choice? What other opportunities did you think of doing, and why did you go to Butler?
No, Butler wasn't my first choice, probably my second choice, but I really didn't, look, I didn't pay really close attention to the whole college thing when I was getting ready to go to college. I think I applied to Butler in, April or May of my senior year in high school. So I guess I was lucky to get in. We just I didn't have the tools at my disposal to maybe look at a lot of different schools for broadcasting. There was no Google, and I'm sure I had a couple people tell me about Butler. Dave Calabro, who was a year ahead of me at Ben Davis, went there. His brother, Kevin, has been a longtime voice of the NBA, and Dave went there. And so Dave, highly recommended it. So I applied to Butler and made it in. And I'm really glad I did, because at that time, the opportunities for kids at Butler for internships and to make connections and network. I guess it was networking before it was popularly called networking back in the early to mid 80s. The opportunities at Butler were better than a lot of other schools in smaller communities.
What sports did you call while you were at Butler?
Basketball and football. And I'm trying to think. I don't believe we did anything else. I may have done a swim meet at one time, but I think it was just basketball and football and maybe a baseball game every once in a while. But the two big focuses for us were the team sports, basketball, football.
Did you get the opportunity to meet or get to know Tony Hinkle?
I met him a couple times. I did an interview with him once, and as I recall, it was after Butler made the NIT in 1985 and went down and got clobbered at Bloomington. I call that game, and Butler, it was the best season they'd had in a number of years, and we were thrilled to make the NIT and go get hammered. But yeah, I remember interviewing him very briefly in one of the back offices after Butler had clinched an opportunity to go to the NIT. I don't believe we knew at the time that it was going to be at Bloomington, but Hinkle was a legend, still is. Obviously, everybody knows that, and it was really a pleasure to meet and talk to him a couple times.
What's interesting about that is 6 Degrees of Separation is that, I got a book that was written about Tony Hinkle, and I didn't put the two together until I was probably, got the book and read the cover. But Howard Caldwell wrote the book on Tony Hinkle. You got to work with Howard Caldwell. That had to be. It's interesting that 6 Degrees of Separation and Howard Caldwell, loving and went to Butler and loving it enough to do a book on Tony Hinkle.
Yeah, Howard was a terrific guy and always had seats, 4 or 5 rows up for as long as he was able to go to the games, and an ardent supporter of the Bulldogs, obviously. And he and I shared a number of conversations about that during our time together at Channel 6. And he loved Butler. He loved the whole Butler way before it was really popularly known as the Butler way. And he was just a genuine guy. I mean, what you saw, I've told people this before, what you saw from Howard on television when you watched, as I did as a kid growing up, is exactly how he was in real life.
What was it like to call that basketball game in Assembly Hall? Was that kind of a goosebumps, or were you kind of like a kid in a candy store, or you're getting to go to IU and you're calling an NIT game for the Bulldogs?
It was I really didn't have. I don't think I had goosebumps. Quite frankly, it was kind of like the movie Hoosiers when Gene Hackman takes the kids in and they measure the hoop and they say, just another basketball arena. Okay, so IU plays here. Big deal. I'm over that in about 5 minutes. Let's get to the game. And, I knew that Butler's chances were not great, but yet my job was to, describe what was going on. And it was cool walking in that place for the first time. Yeah, but then you put it out of your mind and you just try to focus on what's happening in front of you.
What a great job Butler has done maintaining that basketball program even after Brad Stevens has left. It's IU, Purdue, Butler. Poor Ball State, Indiana State, and some of the other schools in the state get lost behind because Butler and has maintained that consistency.
Yeah, and for a number of years, you couldn't say IU, Purdue, Butler. It would be Butler and then IU and Purdue down there somewhere. And a few years ago, Butler, I forget what the stat was. I have to go look it up. But Butler, for a number of years, had the winningest program in the state, period. And, it's, as you know, Billy, it's all about cycles. I mean, Butler's had a couple of off years. I'm confident that Thad's going to bring them back. He's a fantastic coach and a great guy. They're going to get back to where they once were. And we see a resurgence from both Indiana and Purdue. I mean, Purdue's been solid for a number of years with Matt up there. And this team they have this year, yep, they've lost a few games and their number one seed might be in jeopardy. But boy, I tell you what, they are a solid team. But it goes in cycles. I mean, 4, 5, 6, 7 years from now, it might not be the same, but then they'll bring it back. So this is a great, obviously a great state to have quality basketball teams. And, even Ball State is going to be there again one of these days, I'm sure, and Notre Dame as well.
So you're at Butler. What contacts do you make? What do you decide that you want to do with your life while you're at Butler?
Well, I thought it was going to be, radio sportscasting, whether it play-by-play or as a sports commentator, not necessarily, or maybe doing both, talk show, whatever the case may be. And then I decided to do an internship at Channel 6 in 1980, summer of 86, because I thought, you know what, I haven't really done a lot of television. We didn't have a very strong TV program at the time at Butler. So I thought, you know what, I'd like to get some television under my belt. And so I ended up interning at Channel 6 and I loved it and got a job. My first job was over in Illinois and then moved to South Bend, actually the Elkhart station up there for 4 months and 1 day, literally, before I came down back to Indianapolis in January of 1989.
And what is your first job in Indianapolis?
In TV, my first job was actually at WRTV. I came down here when Brian Hammonds left to, I believe at that point he went to the Golf Channel or maybe to Fox 59. I can't remember exactly which, but he had left the station in late 1988 and they hired me, and my first day, January 11th, 1989.
Now, was Ed Sorensen the sports director while you were there at WRTV?
Absolutely. He's the guy I interned with, and he's the guy that fought hard to get me the job there. So, big kudos to Ed.
And is he still working? I think he's out here in Texas, correct?
Yeah, the last I heard, he was in Waco. He was on the air there for a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And then he decided that I think he decided he liked retirement again and decided not to be on the air. But he got, I can't tell you how many years he was off the air, but got that itch again, I think, and decided to dip his toes back in the water. And I think he may be out for good, and that's okay. That's his choice, and that's, more power to him.
Well, he gets viewed probably once a day on YouTube asking Bob Knight questions.
Yes, he does.
When do the Indiana Pacers come into your life?
The the Pacers, of course, I grew up, as we talked about earlier, excuse me, listening to them and watching them, attending their games at the Coliseum and at Market Square Arena. But I was actually in between jobs. This is after I was let go at Channel 6, and I was freelancing for Fox Network during the playoffs in the spring of 1998. So this would have been during the Pacers and the Bulls series. And I was covering them, and I was sitting next to Tim Edwards, who used to work for the Pacers. And he kind of gave me a little bit of a hint, and he said, "Hey, you ought to contact them about doing something for the TV side." And he kind of encouraged me to do that. I had no idea what was happening. And again, this is during the playoffs. So I contacted their director of broadcast at the time, a guy named Larry Mago, and I said, "Hey, listen, I'm just letting you know that I'm out there. I'm available, interested, whatever. I mean, I'll mop the floors, I'll coil mic cables, whatever you need me to do." And, one thing led to another, and they brought me in to host their Pacers Full Court show, which was kind of a weekly magazine show, and then do the pregame and postgame and the halftime shows and a lot of interviews during the game, sideline reporting, as we call it. The interesting thing is, my first year with the team was the lockout season that we affectionately call the 1999-99 NBA season, because there was no fall of 1998, and I think the first game happened in February, maybe around Valentine's Day, I think, in 1999. Ended up playing 50 games that year. So that was my first year with the team.
Let's go back, because you have been the host of the Mecum auction show. Did I get that correct?
Yes.
Since 2008. I have a friend named Adam Hamby who has a YouTube channel called The Hoosier Garage, which is like the most unique automotive channel with an Indiana pop culture twist. And what was your first car growing up? And are you into muscle cars, or, just classic cars?
Everything. My first real car that I would call my own was a 72 Chevelle, which I had for a little while. And, for me, it wasn't something that I, hopped up or did anything to. It was basic transportation at that. And my family, I mean, we lived a very modest lifestyle, and so I didn't have the access to cars that a lot of guys did when we were growing up. But I've always enjoyed cars. I've always loved cars, and I just never had the means to become a serious collector. But then when Mecum came calling in 2008, it's like, okay, this is going to be fun. I got a lot of work to do to study and learn as much as I can about some of the things that a lot of people don't know about, some of the inner details and the mechanics. I mean, I can do some things on a car. I couldn't do a full engine swap like some guys can do it in their sleep. But I have always enjoyed cars, and do I like muscle cars? Yeah, but my bucket list includes cars that aren't necessarily muscle cars as well. For example, a Porsche 911 of any year. That's always been one of my bucket list cars. 57 Bel Air is not a muscle car, but those are fun, and they're always different. Every time we see one, they're just a little bit different, whether it's a different engine, a different paint scheme, whether it's really tricked out a super high-end pro build, or whether they brought it back to stock. If it's all original, we see those as well. So yeah, I like all kinds of different cars.
We kind of had the joke cars when I was growing up. So we owned a 1974 Gremlin GT. I think that I don't think you can allowed to do that, but it was a Gremlin GT. We also, my grandfather would take me to Indianapolis Indians games down on to Busch Stadium in a Pacer.
Oh yeah.
And then my senior year, we decided to go for the one to watch, which was an Encore.
Wow, boy, you were living your best life there, baby.
But my first car was a 1966 Bonneville 389 4-barrel.
Oh,
And it's one of those where you could put a double bed in the trunk and shut the trunk.
yes, absolutely. So what happened to that car?
I threw a rod. I patched it up. I sold it to a friend who's no longer my friend because the rod threw again, and he tried to get a hold of me, and I never called him back.
Oh dear. Well, he'll be the guest next week on the podcast. Right? apparently, your phone's ringing now.
Tell us about Mecum. How did that come about? And just tell us a few stories about, and it's interesting because it looks like you went out of your comfort zone to do Mecum, but you're learning something at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely right. It was completely a God thing. Once again, just like with my guidance counselor in high school, I'm sitting on the couch in my living room in March of 2008, and my phone rings, and the caller ID says Terry Lingner. And if you know who Terry Lingner is, you know that he was one of the guys who was in very early at ESPN. He's one of the originators of Saturday Night Thunder, Thursday Night Thunder, did a lot of racing, and he still it does a lot of things in the television world. Very, very well respected and an absolute fantastic gentleman and human being. Anyway, so my caller ID says Terry Lingner, and I look at the phone, and when Terry calls, you do two things. Number one, you answer the phone. Number two, you say yes to whatever it is he's going to ask you to do. And I said, "Hey, Terry, what's up?" And I'm not kidding, Billy. He said, "Hey, Scott, what are you doing tomorrow night?" That was it. I said, "Well," and actually I was on that particular Saturday night, I was emceeing a fundraiser for the great organization called Indy Reads downtown at the Hyatt. And I said, "Well, I'm emceeing this thing tomorrow night, so I need to honor that." He said, "That's fine. What about next Saturday?" I said, "Nothing. What do you have?" And he said, "Well, I've got this car show that I'd like you to host." I said, "Okay, cool. I'm in. Let's do it." And so the next night before my commitment at the Hyatt, I went over to the fairgrounds, looked around a little bit, met some people, saw some unbelievable cars. And then the next week was my first show with the auction. There had been a couple of shows prior to that, and there some things that happened that I'm not privy to, but Terry just decided to call me and ask me if I wanted to jump in, and I said yes. And I've missed two shows since then in March of 2008. So we're in our 16th year. I missed one event because of my daughter's wedding, and I missed another event because of illness a couple years ago. So that's it, and it's been a pretty good streak.
And we're talking about international exposure. This is watched around the world.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many. Anybody in the world can get it if you go to the Motor Trend website, motortrend.com. You can sign up for the app. It's maybe $4 a month or something like that, and you can watch on demand, which is so popular now. But even when we were on NBC. We were on the air in Norway, I think, and Argentina, and a couple of other European countries, I want to say, and in Canada as well, I believe. So it does have quite a reach, and it's people are fascinated all over the world with American and certainly European classic cars.
Is that set up, and I'm talking just, I should have done a little bit more research. Is that set up by season? Do you have seasons within that program?
Not really officially seasons. Our big event is in January in Kissimmee, Florida, which literally starts right after the first of the year. And we go, February is kind of a, for lack of a better word, it's kind of an off month for the automotive side. But then we pick back up in March, April, and we have a couple of events in a couple of different months. So we average maybe an event and a half per month if you average it out over the whole year. But once December is finished and we're wrapped up for the calendar year, we're ready to go for Kissimmee in just a couple of weeks after that. And I will say this too: the planning for these events, especially Kissimmee, the planning for that event starts at the end of summer, basically. And I can promise you that they're already laying the groundwork for Kissimmee of 2024 next January.
Who are some of your favorite people to, and it could be on the automotive show, but who are some of the favorite people that you've gotten to spend time with on air? Or who are some of those people, like I will do it occasionally, and I know, everybody, I've been told that everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, just like I do. But you're like, wow, I'm like, I found a picture of you with Jay Leno. Like, there's sometimes where I have to get over that I'm actually talking to somebody who I was raised up with as a kid, or I have a lot of respect for as a kid. Who are some of those moments for you through your career?
That's a really good point. What you say about putting your pants on just like everybody else. I tell people often, hey, I'm a regular guy with a weird job, or with a lot of weird jobs, if you will. Michael Jordan, of course, anybody on our team, on the Pacers team back in those days. I remember almost 30 years ago sitting down to interview Jack Nicklaus at the Golf Club of Indiana when he was actually there caddying for his son, who was trying to make the PGA Tour back in those days. And of all the people that you have this preconceived notion that Jack, of all the people that you think might throw you attitude, I learned very quickly that Jack was not one of those guys. He was the most humble. He didn't want to talk about himself. He loved talking about his grandkids and some of the other work that he was doing, and loved talking about caddying for his son. But he was just absolutely delightful to sit down and talk with. I was a little nervous with Jack just because, I mean, he's perhaps the greatest golfer that of our time before Tiger came along. And Tiger's giving him a run for his money, but I still have to go with Jack based on, major championships and 6 green jackets. But I've interviewed a lot of people, and I can't really say that anybody really made me freak out, nervous, sweat, because I try to be prepared. When I go into it, I know what I want to talk to them about, and I try to make them feel at ease, because a lot of times these people have been interviewed to death, and I just want to be me and just let them be them and have fun with it. So that's kind of how I approach it. But Jack put me at ease immediately.
I found another photo and doing research on you of you, of course, interviewing and asking David Letterman questions. What was that experience like, and is that still in your mind?
Oh yeah, sure. Dave didn't want to be interviewed, and I had a solution for that. I just kept talking to him, and I had a little bit of an advantage because we were live on the big screens at the Speedway, and he knew that. He could see that. And, he could have turned and walked away. But again, I was prepared. I knew what I wanted to ask him, and I played right along. He said something goofy, and I said something goofy right back. I don't remember the conversation. I presume that it still exists on tape somewhere. But, just, hey, if he wants to make a smart comment, fine, that's cool. That's what he does. And I loved that. I remember watching him even on his morning show back in the day, and actually got to see his show in person one time when I was in college. So that was a big deal, and that was a lot of fun for me. And again, not nervous, just ready. And he said, I don't want to be interviewed. And I said, well, come on, Dave. There's here we are at the 500, and there's hundreds of thousands of people here. And I just kept right on going, and he was fine with it.
You know how athletes stretch and get their mindset for a game. What is that for you before doing Mecum or before going on air with somebody? Is there something that calms you, or that you will do to kind of, is it a breathing technique to get you ready for what you do? Is there something you do, or you've been doing it so long now that boom, you just go right into it?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's any technique or any breathing technique that I use, or any real secret to it. I have been doing it a long time, and I don't get nervous. It's funny, my good friend Jake Query, he's fine talking on the radio to thousands and thousands of people, because he's in that studio, much like we are here, just you and I talking. It's him and his co-host. But if he gets up in front of a big crowd of people, he'll be the first one to admit that he totally freaks out. He is not comfortable with that. I don't have that problem. It's not a problem. I mean, I love Jake. He's a great friend of mine, but I've never really had an issue with speaking in front of people or speaking to a lot of people through a camera lens, if you will. But how I get ready is, preparing ahead of time, knowing as much about a lot of the vehicles that we're going to see as I can, and just being ready and paying attention to what's happening in front of me, because a lot of times the unexpected will happen. And just being aware and being comfortable with the lineup that we have and knowing what's coming up, that kind of puts me in a comfort zone and allows me to kind of relax, especially when there are massive collections of cars and massive individual cars that are coming to the auction block. For example, a few years ago, we had the Bullitt Mustang from the Steve McQueen film. And that was one of the biggest moments in Mecum history, if not the biggest moment in Mecum history. But the story had been developing with us for a number of months, almost a year, actually. And so when the time came, we were all kind of on edge, but there was a certain calmness there too, because we had known this event was coming. We knew about the car. We knew the story of the car. And we were just waiting for the event to unfold in front of us.
Yeah, and Steve McQueen, another Indiana, Beech Grove, I think, native, right?
I believe so, yeah.
So I see the bass in your background. And, of course, I think of Johnny Cash and the Tennessee 2. And I think of Scotty Moore, and I can't remember the bass player with Elvis Presley. When does the interest in music start?
Well, that was very early, before anything in broadcasting. I grew up in a very musical household. I'm thankful to God for that. My mother played piano and organ for many, many years in the church where I grew up. My dad was the choir director. I sang in the youth choir and then played bass for a little while when I was freshman, 8th grade and freshman. I started playing when I was in the 7th grade. And I started band at my school in the 7th grade as well. And I'd had classical piano lessons for 7 years leading up to that. So music was a major part of our house. And I've always I've always said that if the broadcasting thing hadn't worked out, I would have been in the music industry in some fashion, whether as a musician. I do play professionally, occasionally. I have a jazz band. I've played in a couple of big bands before. I do every once in a while a record project, help on a record project. But I've always said that if it wasn't broadcasting, it would have been music, and I still stay very active in doing that. I don't practice as much as I should, and I think everybody can say that perhaps. But yeah, ever since I was a little kid.
What is kind of your favorite music? I mean, were you a rock and roll kid, or
I grew up hearing a lot of church music in my house and a lot of classical music. So that's how I grew up. And, I listened to the pop radio at the time as a kid, we talked about earlier. And then when I was in college at Butler take that back. My first exposure to jazz was when Chuck Mangione's Feel So Good record came out, and that song got a lot of airplay, and so I had to buy the record. And I thought, wow, this is cool. But what I didn't understand was that 3.5 minute song was actually a cut down, an edited version of the 7 or 8 minute song that's on the LP, right? And there's only 6 songs on that Feel So Good record. And I'm thinking, 6 songs? This is a ripoff. Well, what I didn't understand was, you in the world of jazz, you can expand on the melody, and you play, and everybody takes a solo, and then you come back to the head of the song, the very beginning, and that sort of thing. And then when I got into school at Butler in 1982, our production director, Mark Dunham, who went to Southern Illinois University and is a good friend of mine, got me hooked on jazz and had me host the jazz show at Butler at the radio station there, and kind of be the sort of the music director after a while, pulling tunes and laying out some options for the people who would host the show. So fast forward, my first love these days and for a long time has been jazz. Love that genre. It's such a cool thing to do live when you're making music, you're making it up. You're creating art on the spot in the context of a quartet, a trio, even a duet, a big band, whatever the case may be.
Your voice, I mean, it's soothing, it's calming. Do you do a lot of voiceover work? Do you get a lot of calls to do voiceover work? How does that work?
Well, thank you, first of all. And I would say that I do some voiceover work. I would love to do more. And I have a couple of agencies that I work with, one in Chicago and one in San Francisco. And I audition for a lot of things. But we would all, I think if you would ask anybody who does voiceover for a living or a part-time living, whatever the case may be, we would all say that we would love to be doing more. We'd love to be working more. And it's just a matter of finding the right fit. And excuse me, there are clearly some projects that I'm not the right fit for, but others I would be the right fit for. And so it's finding that spot, and it's really subjective because if somebody is auditioning or getting ready to hire somebody, there could be a committee or a room full of 5 people, and if one person says, I don't really like that guy, then he's out, even though that guy could be perfectly excellent. And it's so subjective. And that's one of the hurdles for me is to, you send in your audition, and whether or not you get called, you don't worry about it. You just put it out of your mind and move to the next audition. If you are fortunate enough to get a call back, great. If you're fortunate enough to be hired, even better. I love when that happens. But yes, to your point, I would be more than happy. If anybody has a project that needs a voice for it, I would be happy to audition. And like I said, maybe I'm the good fit, maybe I'm not, and that's okay.
Do you still work with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I don't have it right here. There's a script somewhere here that I have to record as soon as we're done for their Discovery Concert Series. But yes, this summer, the Discovery Concert Series is for the school kids that go down to the Hilbert Circle Theater and kind of get an experience, maybe for the first time, about classical music in the theater. And they gear it really toward the youngsters, which is a fabulous program. But yes, I will be, Lord willing, out at Prairie again. This will be my 20th summer hosting Symphony on the Prairie with the Indianapolis Symphony and Kroger sponsoring it again this year.
And if you have not been out there, you are missing something big time. It's absolutely beautiful, and the acoustics are actually absolutely fantastic.
It is, and it almost doesn't matter who the band is, who the performers are. I mean, obviously classical music and the symphony is a huge draw, especially the July 4th concert, the Pops concerts that are out there. But regardless, it's an event. It's such a cool event. As you mentioned, Billy, you're out there, you're under the stars. It's wide open. You know, some people do it all the way. I mean, they'll get a table and a whole spread and have it catered, or bring in their own food and a grill or whatever the case may be. And some folks just bring a couple of lawn chairs and throw a blanket out there, and that's it. And that's okay. And they love every minute of it as well. So if you've never been out to Symphony on the Prairie, by all means, we would love to see you out there sometime this summer.
Scott, what's it like being in broadcast? Is there a fraternity to being in broadcasting? Like, I picture you, Dick Ray, Lee Owens, all these, Don Hine. I picture all of you guys meeting once a year in this big cafeteria and talking about your life in broadcasting. I know that's a silly assumption, but do you maintain a relationship with fellow broadcasters?
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting question. We do on some levels, and sometimes we don't. I stay in touch with Dick Ray on occasion. Daryl Burnett, who used to work at Channel 13, is a good friend. He lives up in Green Bay, Wisconsin now. His wife actually used to work for Mecum Auctions a number of years ago. But I stay in touch with another guy, Dave Shore, who interned here in Indy and went on to do great things with the LA Lakers and ESPN. Kevin Gregory, of course, my high school buddy from Ben Davis. He and I called basketball games and volleyball games when we were in high school together, and we stay in touch quite a bit. And Calabro, Dave First, who formerly at Channel 6, and we've gotten together. We get together occasionally to just, have dinner or whatever, and just, we don't even necessarily talk about broadcasting, just other stuff, what's happening in our lives. And you know what? It's we need to do more of that, actually. The last time I recall doing it was after Bob Jenkins passed away not too long ago. A lot of us got together over at Union Jacks in Speedway. Dave Calabro First was there, and some others. I think Jake Query was there as well. So we do that every once in a while, and sometimes it's just a text message here and there to just kind of catch up and, hey, how you doing? What's going on? But yeah, that would be a lot of fun to make that a more regular occurrence.
You worked for WTTV for a little while also?
Yes, actually I did. I was the booth announcer there for a year or so when I was in college. And that was actually my first appearance on live television at Channel 4 when Chuck Marlowe took vacation. they needed somebody to do sports, and they just kind of walked down the hall and asked me if I'd be interested. And I said, absolutely. And so that was my first time on live television.
One of my, I do the interviews I do because I have memories and I have questions about stuff and I want them answered. And I like to share some experiences. And we used to make fun of a broadcaster, not make fun, but we would always love the way he would always end it. And I would always over exaggerate it, but it was Derek Thomas. And I would just love and I'd look at my dad and I go, Derek Thomas for the news, Channel 6.
Yes. And you had just the right amount of pause in there. Take that too short. That was Derek's signature. I mean, great guy, great reporter, and that was his signature. I don't know where, you'd have to ask him where he came up with that. I don't know, but it stuck, and he stuck with it, and good for him.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about, are you a good golfer? Or are you a good fisherman?
I love to fish. I would say I'm it's kind of, I can generally go out on any body of water and catch something. Am I a good fisherman? I don't know. We'll see. Am I a good golfer? Occasionally I can be. I'm working on my game as we speak. My goal this year, I have a couple goals this year, which will go unmentioned here. But I've been working with my good friend, and actually, I'll give him a plug. He's at the Golf Club of Indiana and their Golf Performance Academy out there. His name is Tony Day, and he is the two-time Indiana Teacher of the Year, the Indiana PGA Teacher of the Year. And I've known Tony for a long, long time, and we're really good friends. And he's an excellent teacher. And I was just out there yesterday trying to finally, after all these years, figure out, how to swing the golf club rather than hit the golf ball. And I had both of my hips replaced in 2021. So last summer was a little bit iffy. This summer, I'm really anxious to hit it hard and really make some bona fide improvements in my golf game this summer.
You have so many passions, Scott, and golf, fishing, music, broadcasting. How do you spread that out? How do you kind of keep all of that going? How do you pay attention to each of those passions that you have?
They all get their time, and it's funny, if you don't use it, you lose it. With music, with golf, with broadcasting, whatever the case may be. Obviously, my broadcasting and my voiceover career, that takes priority, and I do that with regularity. I have to keep on that, keep fresh. I have to do the research. I have to stay relevant with what's going on in the car world, with what's going on in the voiceover world, and stay on that. The other two things, golf and fishing and even cycling or whatever, and music, I practice, but hey, when it's time to focus on the car side, that the music gets put away for a while. And when I'm working on a couple charts for a gig, and I know I don't have an event for a couple weeks, I'll work on those charts for the gig. But it's just kind of partitioning everything out and doing the best you can to give each area the necessary attention. And like I said, the career stuff, the long-term stuff, that gets the most attention, as it should. The great thing about it is I'll be able to do voiceover for many years, hopefully, as long as people keep hiring me, and I'll be able to play music for a long, long time as well. And so it's just prioritizing what I need to do right now. I'm already thinking about our next event at the end of March. It's almost a month away, but I'm already looking at cars that are coming up. In fact, we've got a 1958 Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing that's coming up. It's green, the only one they ever made in green. You believe that? It's true.
Are you a grandfather?
I am.
What do they call you?
I have one grandkid. His name is Judah, and he calls me Pawpaw, and that was on him. My daughter one day said, "Can you say hi? Can you say hi to Grandpa?" And he said, "Pawpaw." And I thought, "That's it. That's it. I'm holding him to that." And he'll be 3 in May.
Yeah. For your grandchildren, you can have a script for them, but they're gonna improvise.
They're gonna do it their own way, man. And
that's the best way.
We'll ride along with it. Absolutely.
So, Scott Hoke, what do you said here in a month you go back to filming for the automotive show, and what else do you have upcoming?
I have a trade show that I'm doing in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks, actually 2 weeks from this week. It's part of the Construction Expo, Con Expo. I'm representing a company. And after that, right back to the auctions, and we have Glendale, Arizona, Houston, Texas, right after that in April, and then we get ready for the month of May. For us, is our second biggest event at the fairgrounds, which begins on May the 12th and runs through the 20th at the Indiana State Fairgrounds. So if you happen to be driving by the state fairgrounds and you see all those gigantic white tents up in the air, that's Mecum. We'd love to see you. Come on out and enjoy some great cars. And I will say this, it's kind of similar to the Connor Prairie thing. It doesn't matter, about the music. It's the event at Connor Prairie. Mecum is an auction first and foremost, and they're in the business of selling automobiles. But it's also the best car show that you could ever go to, that you could ever attend, because there's so much stuff that you've probably heard about and seen on TV or didn't even know that it existed. And you're going to see that at a Mecum auction, especially one where there's 3,000 cars like Indianapolis. So once we get through with that, then we get into the summertime portion of the schedule, and we'll keep the pedal to the metal all the way through the end of the year for sure.
Scott Hoke, I kept you long. I could probably keep you longer, but
hey man, my pleasure.
Thank you for your time. This was outstanding. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Always good to talk with you. And I see the Tony Hinkle book on the table in the back. And I just noticed that a while ago after you were talking about Hink. But yeah, man, my pleasure anytime. And always I guess it means we're getting old when we're starting to talk about nostalgia, right?
Yeah, but I got one of those old souls. So do you. So it's fantastic. Scott Hoke, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Billy. My pleasure.